Welcome to our classroom. Welcome, everybody. Here for another episode. Glad you could join us this day. Welcome. In this space, we talk about education, which is inclusive of, but not limited to, what happens in schools. Education is taking place whenever and wherever we are willing to learn. Today, we have Dan Cummings with us. Thank you for being here. Dan, so happy to have you. Let me just share a little bit with the public about you. Dan is a career educator. He's taught in a variety of educational settings, from alternative high schools to college prep schools, parochial to public. Got the range of experience. He's in his 23rd year as an educator, 8th year as a principal, with degrees from Colorado State University and Middlebury College, an avid practitioner of the martial arts, so watch out. And he's also an amateur photographer. Dan and his wife just celebrated 20 years of marriage. Salute to you and your wife. And spent the last 6 months building a small off-the-grid cabin in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. Wild and crazy. Dan, I'm so happy to have you with us. You bring not only a wealth of experience, but kind of a unique background in terms of your come up and also what you're doing with the off the grid stuff. And so I'm happy to have you here because you're going to offer something different to our public than some of the people I've been interviewing. And we're all diverse and unique. And so thank you, Dan, for being here. It's such a pleasure to connect with you.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So I want to go ahead and get started just by having you share with everybody. And I usually start the show this way. How do you self-identify? Where are you from? And can you tell us a little bit about your educational journey, whether as a learner or as a professional?
Yeah, you bet. And I'll start again just by saying, thanks for having me on. Thanks for welcoming me into this. I'm really excited to be here and happy to be talking to you today. So self-identity, I identify cisgendered, straight white male. I see myself in that class of privilege that comes with all of those things. I had a pretty blue collar upbringing, run-of-the-line public schools, did pretty well, was able to go to college after that. So I feel blessed with that. And I have been a career educator ever since I graduated college. Like you mentioned, this is my 23rd year in education. I've taught every year, including now. I've been a principal for 8 years, still teaching in a classroom this year, teaching a senior English capstone class. I think that working with kids in the classroom is the best way to run a school. You really know what's going on that way. Other things in my identity, I am a practitioner of Zen Buddhism. I am a lover of all kinds of music. I am a husband. I am a friend to people. I am a son, and very involved with my mother and father as well. In terms of where I'm from, my father was military, so I traveled all over growing up. I was born in Mississippi, lived in Japan, lived in New York, lived in Texas, lived in Colorado, and that kind of has continued into my adult life. Lived in Mexico and Chiapas, lived in Honduras, lived in Guatemala, lived in New York, Ohio, Austin, Texas, and now I am circled back to Colorado. And in terms of my educational journey, I don't know. I'm one of those, I kind of just woke up into teaching. I didn't plan on doing that to begin with. I had a professor in college that, just kind of took me under his wing and got me involved in a program called the Fresh Air Fund out of upstate New York, working with children. And that just took me on my track into teaching. So, I've done it for a long time now. As Roberto mentioned, I'm currently living in a rural area of Colorado. My wife and I are building. We have a small house that we've just completed, completely off grid, solar, sustainable, all of that. And I am currently a principal at a small Title I school Again, in the mountains, we're 86% of my students qualify for free and reduced lunch. We have a large transient population. The major economy in the area is casinos and gold mining, and that comes with a lot of abuses in the community, drug abuse, physical, mental, emotional abuse, and a lot of poverty as well. So, I have a very strong faculty, a strong group of teachers that I'm working with. And we have a very challenging group of students and families that we work with. Great people, great kids, a lot of generational challenges for them to overcome. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, where I started and where I'm at right now.
Thanks for sharing. Man, you have such an interesting experience in terms of different places you've lived and been. And surely you've seen a lot, and that's influenced you. I want to focus our conversation on where you're at and leading this rural school, because I think there's room to talk more about the experiences in rural areas and what education looks like there. You started getting into a little bit of the challenges that you experience in that setting. You mentioned high poverty over there, and talking about poverty and education, I think it's so important because it links so many groups of people across differences. That poverty thing is certainly a strand, and so would love for you to talk about a little bit more about some of the challenges in the setting that you're in, and also to talk about some of the glows, some of the highlights in that particular setting. You mentioned you have a good group of faculty, and I think it's important not just to talk about the negative things and the challenging things, but to also highlight those positive things that really fill our cup.
Yeah, absolutely. Starting with the grows, in any small rural town, there's an insular aspect to it. So students and families don't necessarily see beyond that insular aspect. They don't see different options, they don't see different paths. And so when it comes to education, if generationally nobody in your family has ever considered anything past, middle school or past high school, you're not necessarily coming up in an education system that is going to encourage you to push past that either. So, in a lot of small towns, and I'll speak for the district I'm in right now, not a lot of parents have high school diplomas necessarily, or definitely not a lot of parents have gone to college. So, trying to get students to buy in and understand what education can be is a challenge, because they're only hearing it on one side of their lives. The time they spend at school is very limited compared to the time they spend with influences outside of school. So, getting them to understand that it could open doors if they pursue it in a certain way is a challenge. So you have that generation gap of how an education can benefit you. You also have the maybe, and this is, I don't know, it's my opinion, you also have the controversy of public education isn't necessarily designed to benefit people in poverty or people in rural communities. It's been designed historically for elites is where it started, and we have a great education system in this country because we do offer it to everybody. But it's also a very failing education system because it's not offered equally to everybody. Equal access is not equitable, as we all know. And so that affects students in rural communities in a lot of different ways. I could go on for days about that. You have a lack of opportunity as well. Whereas in an urban environment, perhaps you have access to community colleges, you have access to partner with other schools, you have access to partner with other businesses or other opportunities for the learning. In a small rural town, my total student population for a 6 through 12 school is about 200 students. The entire area maybe has, I'd say 5,000 people in it, and that's over 20 square miles. A lot of that is farming. Not a lot of access to opportunities outside of school. So we get a lot of students that come in with a lack of a foundation, a lack of a direction, and a lack of voices, telling them where they could go or what they could be. addressing that poverty piece of it, being a community that's based in casino money and mining, there's a huge amount of transience. We have students coming and going, we have families losing jobs. We have a significant lack of available housing because there's literally just not buildings up there. And similar to, I would compare it to like a resort town, whether that's on a beach or in the mountains somewhere, where a whole lot of people come in as tourists and a whole lot of people with money have vacation homes. And they come in and they take advantage of the area and they take advantage of the beauty that it offers and the activities that it offers for 1 or 2 weekends a year. But what they leave behind is unaffordable housing for those of us that live there. They leave behind seasonal work for the people who are passing through looking for jobs. They leave behind not a whole lot generated in property taxes, not a whole lot of support for school boards, not a whole lot of community involvement. Because the people left behind who are living there, they're living in low-income housing, they're living in hotels, they're living in trailers. Some of my students are living on the street, which you don't think about that when you think about a rural community, but the poverty is real, and that's a significant challenge for all of my students. Man, I said a lot there, but let me summarize that. I think the biggest piece of it is that lack of access, and our school becomes a center to a community. We become a resource. Like our biggest job is providing food for families, and education takes a secondary role to making sure kids are fed, to making sure kids have access to healthcare. So that's a big grow, that's a big area. In terms of what's going well,
feel safe when you don't have the basics in place. It's hard for you to focus and say like, oh yeah,
yep.
I'm really tuned into my education. I'm like, nah,
Yep.
you're hungry, you need to be fed.
Maslow's, classic Maslow's hierarchy. When we get kids coming in and they haven't slept, or the other big piece of it, Roberto, is like you see like our elementary school full classes. Our middle school pretty full. You hit the high school though, so many of the students in this community, they hit 16, 17 and they need to contribute. They're going to work on a farm. They're going to get a job, making $10 an hour in some cases because they need to contribute to their family. So by the time we hit, sophomore, juniors, seniors in high school, a lot of those kids have disappeared because they're out working. So a big part of our high school program is also a GED program, and recently, really developing a work study program that's allowing these kids to earn some cash while still pursuing a high school degree.
Yeah, and again, this theme of poverty, it's a strand that I wish communities across the nation that are tackling this would really connect and build and share stories and experiences, because you're saying a number of things that remind me of schools and areas in which I've served and you've served, but with a different population, and yet there's this commonality when it comes to this poverty piece. So thank you for sharing that. And
yeah, you bet.
Listeners are really processing this and considering ways in which we could help build down, kick down the walls that separate us and connect across communities, across these differences, with the hope of like being able to eradicate poverty and give people greater access. So we heard that, you shared about these growths and these challenges. Want to hear about some of the glows. Want to hear about some of the highlights. What's filling your cup in this particular setting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned a second ago, I have a great faculty. People are in it with their eyes open. People are involved. People are, very focused on what's good for kids and for families. They're not getting paid what they should, just like any other teacher out there. But their heart is in the right place, and they come every day really, really wanting to work with kids, and I put like, again, just to be clear, when I talk about poverty and I talk about families, these kids and these families they're good people. They're in a position that they don't necessarily see beyond their circumstances, but they're good people. The kids are hilarious. The kids are a lot of fun to work with. their families as well. They're very supportive in one way. They appreciate what we're doing at the school, which, you don't find at every school. In some schools, in my experience, in some schools, there's a bit of entitlement or a bit of expectation. Most of our families and most of our students don't have that entitlement. They really appreciate what we're trying to do, even if they're not able to engage it in at a level that I would hope. So yeah, just the day to day is fun. Just the day to day of this school is exciting. It's exciting to be a part of in a very positive way. I think that in the past year, middle of COVID, somewhere in there, funding started freeing up. There started to be a lot of grants, a lot of federal monies going out there to try and address, the consequences or the results coming out of COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the big glows that we have in our district right now, here in the state of Colorado, the governor released a fairly large grant program to address needs and earmark that for rural communities. And me and a couple of my colleagues wrote a grant, and we're lucky enough to be a recipient of about $1.5 million last January, which is directly going into our school to build a career and technical education program that was non-existent. So I'm super excited to be a part of that. That's going to be a huge boon to the community. We're really working with the community and the way we develop that. For instance, one path we're taking is we're creating a construction trades program. And it involves building a brand new building for our students where they will be able to, learn hands-on construction trades on the campus, and kind of augmenting that. An ancillary benefit is that they're going to be building small, tiny homes in this construction trades building, which the city that we work with has already donated land for and will be offering hookups for. So, the sustainability of the program is that we will be building tiny homes, which then go into the community for low-income housing, for families in the community that need that. So I'm really excited about getting that kind of program going, and I'm appreciative to the federal monies that, the state is divvying out for this sort of thing. I'm glad that they saw us. I'm glad that they understand, we can't wait. We can't wait 10 years to fix what's going on. We need some help right now. So that's pretty exciting.
That's right.
And I would add, just like I said before, one of the positives in the school I'm at right now is that people recognize that we are really a community service, that we're there to help families, and that the education piece is a part of that. But at the end of the day, getting kids and families connected with social services is equally or more important in some cases than our math curriculum, I guess. And people understanding that and having that common vision, really makes it go pretty smoothly. That's a big plus.
That's great. That's great. Congrats on that $1.5 million grant.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's a big deal.
Kudos to you and your colleagues. Would love to see more schools across the country focusing on helping our young people develop skills, especially trade skills.
That's right.
And open up all types of opportunities and present them on career paths that might be better suited for them, because
that's right.
Everybody does not learn the same way. So that is awesome. And then
that comes back to that, like public education, with that idea of, me growing up the way I grew up, that idea of college was always kind of in my mind. That idea of college was always a conversation.
Right.
But that's not necessarily the goal of every family or of every child. And so creating an education system that allows students to both, find that success of a high school diploma or a GED, while also, finding a passion and a skill or a trade that they really want to involve themselves in, not separating those two, not making it this or that, but, we can do both of those and value what some of these students, want to do. And again, I'm sorry if I'm derailing, but again, in a rural community like ours, access that we don't have a community college. We're 4 hours from the nearest, university and college, but we do have access to construction and trades jobs. We do have access to culinary arts opportunities. So, trying to meet the students where they're at, and give them a reason and give them that basic public education that also prepares them for something that is realistic, for something that is there for them to grab onto. I think that
And
that's
in some cases might be more beneficial. You
that's right.
are
That's
considering
absolutely right.
college debt and
That's
how it
right.
has people in the rat race, versus, young folks who are coming out with trade skills
That's
and
right.
leveraging that into great careers. Uh,
That's right.
I think what y'all doing is wonderful, while also meeting a need for the community by building those tiny homes.
That's
Dope,
right.
dope, man. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, what are some misconceptions that folks from the outside might have about settings like yours, schools like yours, these rural communities? I feel like sometimes we don't necessarily know enough. We don't talk enough about rural schools and rural
Yeah.
populations. So, what are some misconceptions that folks might have?
Yeah. I think that the big one, especially in the town where I'm at, is often associating rural with kind of conservative or even like redneck kind of values.
Okay.
I think that is, you know, stereotypes come from somewhere, but I also think that the way technology and social media and access online has changed that even in my lifetime. My families are not all conservative. My families are not all redneck farmers. My families are not all, just this, very, very small box of people. Um, you know, of all the schools that I've ever worked at, the school that I'm at right now has the largest population of gender nonconforming students. It has the largest population of the LGBTQ plus community, percentage wise, that I've ever seen in any school. You do have a lot of open mindedness. You do have a lot of what would be considered liberal values and progressive values. And yeah, a lot of that is overlapped with the mining community and is overlapped with a very Republican leaning county overall. But you know, I think a lot of people think that everybody in the community and everybody in the school, leans one way politically, and that's just not the case. A lot of very open-minded people up here. I also think, and maybe this is again the outsider thing, but when we talk about outsiders coming into our community, they're often vacationers, they're often tourists passing through, and they see a very beautiful Colorado mountainside, and they have very nice meals and they stay in very nice hotels, and I think they see the quality of living up here with some rose-colored glasses. Because once what they don't see is where the people serving them breakfast actually live. What they don't see is where the people taking them on tours, what their day-to-day life is actually like. So I think there's a mistake. Everybody's like, oh, we want to live up there, we want to be there, but they don't. They're seeing it from a very touristy perspective, not necessarily realistic for what is going on in our town or around our town. Um, and I think that's a misconception that people definitely have. Um, what else would I say? Our population is I would say majority white families, but we have a significant community of immigrants. We have a significant community of Native Americans. We have a significant community of families that identify as non-white for a variety of reasons. And so I think the community does get whitewashed a little bit, and that's just not the case. When you think rural, it's important to think also of marginalized. A lot of people in a rural community are people who have been marginalized in other places, and they're finding work in a rural community that they couldn't necessarily find, in an urban environment. So
Interesting.
I think that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Again, I think there's not enough talk about rural communities and understanding the experiences there and how we can support and build. And so I appreciate you offering that perspective. I am
Yeah.
curious to know what the work of justice looks like in your school setting, especially given that you mentioned um, these marginalized folks and people groups that perhaps many of us don't think about.
Yeah.
Immigrant groups, and you mentioned well, I'm blanking, but I heard you say immigrant for sure.
You bet. You bet.
And then you mentioned a couple other groups. So
Yeah, Native American populations. Absolutely.
So I'm curious to know what the work of justice looks like in
Yeah.
your school
It,
setting.
I would say, kind of repeating something I maybe already said. I think that, on some level, justice looks like combating generational poverty. Justice looks like creating options. Justice looks like finding a way to, put the public education system to work for the people that it traditionally has not served by finding them options, by creating these programs, by, if they're not quote unquote college bound, not beating them over the head for that, but finding a way to still be of service to them. I think that adds to, that builds on justice for sure. I think more, on a smaller scale for me in this particular school, I think it's about keeping police, as an example, keeping police out of our hallways. You've heard of everybody's heard of the, school to prison pipeline. I started thinking about it a little differently. What I see in my experience is more of a, it's a birth to prison pipeline. That if you're born in a particular sort of circumstances, there's a particularly high likelihood that you're going to wind up in our prison system. And the school is in between there. It's not the school that's creating that pipeline. The school is in the middle of that pipeline. They can either be a facilitator of that pipeline, but I'm trying to get our school to be an intervention in that pipeline. That students come into us with a particular background, and we can either punish them and keep them going down that pipeline by having cops in our hallways and getting these kids in trouble, and or we can be an intervention, and using restorative practices and using resources and using alternates and giving them options, try to get them out of that pipeline by giving them another direction. So that's a mentality I'm trying to hold on to when it comes to justice. Is again, like, it's not a school to prison pipeline. A school is a valve in that pipeline, but we do have the ability to divert that, and that's by working with those families and working with those kids, and all respect to people who are in the police force, but schools aren't prisons. Schools should not be run as prisons, and 14 and 15-year-olds should not be getting arrested or taken out in handcuffs. So I think that's justice in a small rural school. And I think that when I'm talking about that, I'm not just talking about discipline, but I'm talking about restorative practices in terms of helping kids make better decisions and holding them accountable, but also that whole let me back that up. Helping kids and holding them accountable, but that whole oh, you have to learn a hard lesson, you have to have grit, all of that. All of my kids have had hard lessons coming into my school. They have grit just by showing up in the morning, and that seems to be a upper middle class value that my kids have mastered. So let's acknowledge that, and let's give them credit for that, sometimes literal credit for that. And let's help them see some other tools of success that will help them in their future as well.
Right. Yeah. So not just grit, but gravy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that idea, telling kids, oh, if you just work harder, you're going to do better. That's not valuing the fact that they are working really hard already. And they don't necessarily know what that means. You'll do, quote unquote, you'll do better. They don't have the vision of what that means. So if we can acknowledge that they're already working hard, that they're already just surviving, and then give them different visions to choose from, it's a way to partner with kids and with families that, I don't think that, public education, as a monster that it is, doesn't necessarily always pursue that. It's a lot easier to suspend a kid. It's a lot easier to kick a kid out than it is to sit down and help that kid see the strengths that they have, and how if they reapply those strengths, they're going to come out with a different outcome.
Right. It's awesome. Well, to close out,
Yeah.
what's a message of encouragement you want to offer the public?
Yeah. I think that, simply put, for people involved in education or people involved in service of any kind, just to remember that it matters, that what you're doing matters. Plenty of times you're going to come home, plenty of times I come home, and I'm beat down and I'm tired and I'm exhausted and the ideals go away. So remembering that nothing is a small fight, that everything actually matters when you're doing this kind of work. I remember it's an old story, like everybody's heard it. Guy walking down, two guys. No, sorry, let me start the story over. Guy walking down a beach, and he sees this woman walking up in front of him, and the beach is just littered with jellyfish that have washed up on shore. There's some migration. I don't know what's going on. All these jellyfish up on shore. And, despite the fact that those jellyfish might, sting them a little bit, the lady is walking down and she's picking up these jellyfish and she's throwing them back in the water as far as she can. She's throwing them way back out there, and the guy walking behind her is like, that's really nice of you, but look at this beach, it's full of these jellyfish. You're never going to be able to save them. How do you think you're making a difference? And the lady picked up another jellyfish and she said, you know what? I can't save all of them, but this one matters. And what I'm doing matters to this one. And she throws it out in the ocean. I think that's a perspective that's important to keep when you're in education, that it's not, you're never going to fix everything, but even the smallest fights make a difference to somebody. So, doing what you can, it matters. Mm-hmm. That's my encouragement.
Awesome. So doing what you can, taking the small steps.
That's right.
In the midst of a big fight.
That's right. And you're not, you're not put here to fix everything.
Right.
You're put here to help where you can.
Right. Sometimes we overwhelm ourselves with
trying
to fix all the problems in the world, as opposed to focusing on 2 or 3 things that we can do.
That's right.
Thanks for that encouragement.
Yeah.
So you started by talking about, a house you built off the grid and whatnot. And, I usually want to try to encourage people to follow my guests, but then you're off the grid. So how can we follow you? How can people stay connected to you? Can people stay connected to you?
That's hilarious. It's like you're saying, I definitely fairly reclusive. I told you the story about not knowing what IGTV was and then realizing
right.
Instagram. I am on Instagram. It's D Cummings 00. It's more of a personal account. I haven't really used social media professionally, although everybody keeps telling me I need to. I have a good friend, Tom Gibson, and he's constantly.
Oh, yes, Gibson Education.
Yep. He's constantly telling me I need to get my voice out there. And, maybe I'll do that at some point. I guess I see myself like more of a grinder, less of a rainmaker. I'm doing the work on the ground and I don't know. I'm not very good at the bigger picture, like inspiring people and getting the word out there, like you or like Tom. You guys are great at that kind of stuff. So I don't know.
I think it speaks to the point of what we discussed earlier in terms of different tracks for different things, right? For our youngsters.
That's
everybody, I don't even want to see everybody doing this, right? If I see everybody doing this, then I'm probably going to pivot and do something else.
That's right.
I like the fact that, we have, some folks who are out there being more vocal, and then we have some folks who are also grinders. I've always been a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
But, I appreciate you staying true to, how you feel you need to operate in this world, because I know you're doing the work, but that's one of the reasons I want to interview you so people know a little bit about you, a little bit about the work that you're doing in rural schools, and then hopefully that will encourage those who are working in the rural settings, but also for those of us who are not working in the rural settings to build that awareness and, be moved to somehow stay connected to supporting what's happening in rural environments.
Yeah, I think that's great, Roberto. And just remembering that, I think the big bad media or however we want to label that, likes to pit urban and rural against each other. But, like you said several times, that common thread of poverty is there. And if we could get people talking about that and understanding that, that could go a long way.
Well, Dan, we want to thank you, or I want to thank you for being here with us on our classroom. It's been wonderful to hear more about your story, to hear a bit about what's happening in the setting that you're at, to be challenged and encouraged by some of the things that you're saying, and really looking forward to hearing more about how your school and that community is moving forward, especially with the work connected to that $1.5 million grant.
Yeah, you bet.
Tiny homes that are going to be built. That's even though I'm not part of that particular community, I'm excited for you all. And
thanks,
so,
man. Yeah, it's
keep me posted. Keep me posted. Keep us posted. Pass some photos along as they start building some of the tiny homes. I would love to share it on our platform so our people can view the progress, view the starting point, view the end point, and again, who knows? Maybe there's another school leader that's going to be inspired to go and do something similar.
Right on. Absolutely.
And thank you, Dan Cummings. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for listening and following us, being connected to Multicultural Classroom. Again, this is our classroom, and as I stated, learning happens whenever and wherever we are willing to stay open to learn new things and apply them. So, peace be with y'all. We out.